Now it's good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you to today's seminars. We are doing the final in a series of 25 work health and safety webinars and in-person presentations by the Department of Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety. This webinar will focus on work health and safety, asbestos and demolition licensing regulations. My name is Bill Mitchell and my colleagues today are Zarina Detonac and Lucy Packham from the DEMERS licensing branch, responsible for processing demolition and asbestos authorisations under the work safety laws. I would like to commence this webinar with an acknowledgement to country. The Department of Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of this land on which we deliver our services. Pay our respects to elders and leaders past, present and emerging. After the presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of WorkSafe officers present. To ask a question, please go to slido.com and use the code #WHS6. The government has provided exposure drafts of the work health and safety regulations in order that workplace participants can prepare for the commencement of the work health and safety laws. The focus of today's webinar, as I've mentioned, is on demolition and asbestos licences. However, if you require more general information and the exposure draft, these are available on the work health and safety regulations on the work health and safety website. The department has recorded copies of the previous webinars on the work health and safety regulations, and these have been lodged for uploading. It is expected that the webinars will be available on the DEMERS website today or first thing next week. So we've had a problem with Lucy's microphone, so we've just jumped ahead to the asbestos removalists, and Serena will do her presentation and then we'll go back to Lucy from there.
Good afternoon. My name is Zarina. I'll be presenting the asbestos removalist portion of this presentation. So, what is changing with work health and safety? Essentially, one of the main changes is that unrestricted asbestos removal licenses will be deemed to be Class A removal licenses, and restricted asbestos will be deemed to be Class B removal licenses under work health and safety. One of the other changes which may be of particular relevance to applicants is the fact that the regulator may actually impose conditions in relation to the nature of the work or activities authorised by the licence. So what that means essentially is that if an applicant was to apply for their asbestos removal licence and they only had one type of experience in removing asbestos, the regulator may actually impose a condition that would allow them, that would limit the scope of work that they were doing on that licence. One of the other sort of predominant changes is that all asbestos licenses that are current at commencement will have their expiry dates extended by an additional 12 months at no cost. Those who are affected by both the change of their license name and the fact that their license has been extended by an additional 12 months will receive written notification from the regulator advising them of their name change and extended expiry date. At this stage, no new licenses will be issued, but upon request they will be. So the length of the license has now been extended from 3 years to 5 years, and currently under the occupational safety and health regulations, we have a 30-day grace period to submit a renewal after expiry, but with work health and safety, there will be no grace period. There are renewal provisions that apply, so you're encouraged to make sure that your details are up to date, so your email address and mobile number. The department will continue to provide renewal reminders as a courtesy, so please make sure that these are up to date if you haven't done so already. As part of the renewal application, each supervisor will be required to hold a certification for the specified vet course and demonstrate appropriate experience. The renewal must be provided before the license expires. Like I said earlier, there is no grace period. And one of the main changes as well with this is that if you have submitted your renewal application and the license expires while the application is being determined, you must cease work while the application is under consideration. With the work health and safety, we will see a new license type being regulated in Western Australia, and these are asbestos assessors. The requirement to hold an asbestos assessor license, we have transitional arrangements to assist with this. So to provide for competent persons to apply for a license to conduct clearance inspections for Class A asbestos removal, a grace period of 12 months will apply. So basically that means that an asbestos assessor license will not be required to carry out clearance inspections. During this time, clearance inspections may be conducted for both classes of asbestos removal work by an independent, competent person. Part 8.10 of the Work Health and Safety legislation relates to the licensing of asbestos removalists and asbestos assessors. So the provisions are prescribed in pretty much the same manner for all of asbestos, and this can be found under Regulation 491. So that's it from me in terms of asbestos. I'll just take the slide back to Lucy for the demolition portion of this presentation.
Hello, my name is Lucy Packham. I'm going to be talking about demolition quickly. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So classes of demolition work, Class 1 and 2 demolition licenses will be deemed to be equivalent licenses under WHS. They will remain the same from the OSH regs. From commencement, work that formerly required a Class 3 demolition license may be conducted without a license. So current holders of Class 3 demolition licenses will receive a pro rata refund of their license fee, and that's calculated on unexpired duration of their license, and that will be commencing as soon as practicable after the implementation of the regs. The regulator may impose restrictions on a demolition license that narrow the scope of the types of work or activities ordinarily authorised by a demolition license. So demolition length of license and renewal, valid for 3 years, no change to current license holders. Renewal provisions apply. Renewal reminders will be updated and continue to be as courtesy. Keep your details up to date to ensure that you receive those. For the applicant, written evidence that the applicant has obtained retraining or reassessment or taken other action required under the conditions of the license holder. Renewal application must be made before expiry. There is no grace period for demolition, and you can continue to work if renewal is received and the license expires. And that's it for demolition.
Yes, thanks, Lucy. So we're coming to the conclusion of our formal presentation, and as I've mentioned before, this is an opportunity for you to ask us some questions in relation to asbestos and demolition licensing. The department is providing a great deal of information about the work health and safety laws as they commence, and the screen in front of you now shows an address for you to subscribe to the WorkSafe newsletter. We will be providing information about the work health and safety laws, primarily through our newsletters. And if you're not already, we would encourage you to subscribe. Alternatively, the department has a microsite for the work health and safety laws, and this microsite is being updated and has a great deal of information now. So it was launched in September, and obviously the closer we get to the work health and safety laws commencing, the more information will be provided, and even after the laws commence, the department will continue to publish information. There is also some social media addresses there for you as well, if you want to keep up to date. We are now going to the part of the session where you can ask questions, and I'm not sure whether we've We've got one question. Okay. So at this stage, and once again, I would encourage you to ask any questions you may have. The other issue for you is that the government has spent a great deal of money, provided significant resources to promote the work health and safety laws. There are some funding has been provided to peak bodies. These include the HIA, the Housing Industry Association, the Master Builders Association, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Chamber of Minerals and Energy, and the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies. There's also been some funding provided to Unions WA as well. So those peak bodies have been provided with that funding to assist in the promotion of the work health and safety laws. And they've all, one of the conditions in terms of receiving that money has been to make sure that they provide information not just to their members, but more broadly as well. So I'll now go to the questions. And the first question is, what training is needed for those working on a demolition site?
Hi, this is Zarina. I'll attempt to answer that question. As far as we're aware, the training requirements have not changed for work health and safety in comparison to the occupational safety and health legislation. Sorry, I didn't turn my video on. Hi. Yeah, they haven't changed. So currently, those who are on a site will need to be trained in safe methods of demolition. This requirement will remain the same for work health and safety.
So the next question is, will there be guidance material published by DEMIRS relating to what was discussed today?
Yes, there will be.
So I suspect we'll also be putting these slides on the website in the not too distant future as well. There looks to be a lot of asbestos additions in the new WA regs compared to the OSH regs. Can you please expand on this? So perhaps if you talk about some of the training and the licensed asbestos assessor class.
So a lot of the requirements around the asbestos assessor class is still being determined because it's a brand new license type in Western Australia. So we're still trying to work out a few of the requirements in terms of the qualification and or both of either the qualification that is expected of applicants and the experience that they're required to demonstrate. But essentially with asbestos assessors, as per the work health and safety legislation, applicants are required to demonstrate the skills and experience, the knowledge that they have of relevant asbestos removal industry, as well as provide certification or a copy of the certification, which is a vet course or a tertiary qualification in a science degree. So that again is prescribed by the legislation. In terms of the Class A and Class B or unrestricted and restricted asbestos removal, the requirements are more descriptive in the work health and safety legislation. So with a Class A or an unrestricted, applicants are required to provide a copy of their certification in the form of a vet course. These are still being determined, so when applicants are required to apply, that information will be made available to them. The evidence that the nominated supervisor for the applicant, evidence needs to be provided that the nominated supervisor has 3 years of relevant industry experience, and the applicant needs to provide evidence of a certified safety management system. So that's a new requirement with the work health and safety legislation, which is still being determined as a matter of policy by the WorkSafe Western Australia Commissioner. For Class B or restricted asbestos, there is still an experience requirement that needs to be met. So applicants need to submit a copy of their certification in the form of a vet course, again, still being determined. and also evidence that the nominated supervisor has at least 1 year of relevant industry experience.
Also, in relation to training, there is a prescribed specified VET course for workers as well before they can do the training. So certainly there has been an increase in the training requirements. In terms of asbestos notifications, under the existing occupational safety and health laws, there is a requirement for friable asbestos removal work to be notified to DEMIRS. Under the work health and safety laws, that notification requirement is also extended to non-friable asbestos as well. So the next question I will ask is, will training requirements for holders of Class A demolition licenses match up with the eastern states? So the training requirements, there's a reference to specified VET courses. So all of the courses will be the same. The licenses will be recognised around Australia. So the short answer is yes. What obligations are on commercial property managers to create and maintain an asbestos register? So just can't quite recall the words, but I'm sure it'll be the PCBU. So if you are a PCB, you have a responsibility to make sure that the asbestos register is maintained. Clearly, there's going to be a situation where there are more than one PCBU involved at a workplace. That will come down to negotiation between the parties involved, and that's typical with the work health and safety laws, in that all parties at the workplace have a role ensuring workplace safety laws, in terms of ensuring safe and healthy workplaces, and also the work health and safety laws are complied with. When we will be able to apply for asbestos assessor licenses? Serena.
You are able to apply for an asbestos assessor licence on commencement, so once the legislation is enacted. However, there isn't a requirement to hold an asbestos assessor licence for the next 12 months, which is a transitional arrangement to allow those who wish to be part of that industry to obtain the necessary qualifications and experience.
Is there going to be a system put in place for the residential demolition sector? So I think we probably need a little bit more information about that, because with the work health and safety laws, the existing demolition requirements will remain the same, with the exception that Class 3 demolition licence is no longer required. Not sure whether we've answered your question there, but if you can come back with some more details, we will endeavour to respond accordingly. The next question is, can you clarify the requirements of independence of the licensed asbestos assessor in relation to being employed by the asbestos removalist versus client? So in relation to independent, there's no definition, but if a licensed asbestos assessor was employed by an asbestos removalist, that would probably not meet the requirements in relation to independence. The licensed asbestos assessors have their own licence, and they are required to maintain their independence and provide unbiased advice. So clearly, it'll be a matter for the asbestos removalist and the client to determine who engages the assessor, and there will be a contract, but nevertheless the assessor is still required to provide independent advice. MERS previously published a comparison of national model work health and safety laws versus previous WHS regime. Will this document be updated following the release of the new work health and safety regulations? So I assume the document you're talking about relates to the consultation package that the department produced. So there were a number of changes that we identified, but as we identified during that consultation, there was no guarantee that it was the complete register of all of the changes. If you have a look at chapter 11.4 of the work health, the exposure draft of the work health and safety regulations, you'll find there are a number of transition measures. So that will identify where there are some significant changes between the existing work health and safety laws and OSH regulations. Generally speaking, the outcome of the work health and safety laws is not dissimilar to the occupational safety and health laws. The department is endeavouring to provide some comparisons, but as you'll appreciate, we have a great deal of work to do and we've had to prioritise our resources. Will training requirements for holders of a Class A demolition? Will training requirements for holders of a Class A demolition licence match up with the eastern states? We've already done that. Is any worker who enters a demolition site required to have a demolition qualification, i.e. does an engineer inspecting building need to have a qualification?
I think we may have answered this question earlier, but in essence, anyone that is on a demolition site is required to obtain the qualification Safe Methods of Demolition, which is obtained from a registered training organisation. So if that's not exactly the question that you're asking, please clarify and I can try and answer it for you, but I hope that that's answered that question.
When do you expect the new regulations to be enacted? So on the 15th of December last year, the Honourable Stephen Dawson MLC, who was the Minister at the time, made an announcement that the work health and safety regulations were expected to be published in March 2022. There was no commitment in terms of a commencement date, but it's expected it's going to be done as quickly as possible, and it will depend upon when the work health and safety regulations are published. Next question is, what is the requirement for air monitoring? Has it changed? So the licensed asbestos assessor, look, I'm sorry, I can't recall what the particular requirements for that are. We'll have to check. So if you can send your details to one of the email addresses, we'll endeavour to get that changed for you. But I don't think there's any changes in relation to the air monitoring. I'm sorry, I just can't recall.
Sorry, I'll just quickly add a comment on that.
Yes.
I won't be able to add any further clarity in relation to the air monitoring, but if you're interested, just in relation to the fact that the exposure regulations are on our website, that's specifically found under Regulation 482, and the prescribed requirements are there for you if you wanted to have a read.
Will a current asbestos assessor licence issued under the ACT be accepted in Western Australia? So the ACT is the Australian Capital Territory, and if it is consistent with the work health and safety laws, the national model work health and safety laws, it will be accepted in Western Australia. So this applies to all of the work health and safety jurisdictions, and both the Class A and Class B asbestos removal licenses. So the next question is, for non-friable asbestos, does a supervisor need to be on site at all times or just readily available, being that all workers have the VET course and competent? So I can't remember the exact term, but the supervisor doesn't need to be there, but they certainly need to be readily available, I think is the precise language. So certainly the supervisor needs to have oversight of the work and be readily available. The next question is, there is mention of ensuring that a person needs to be a competent person when performing asbestos work. Can you please explain what is required to be competent? So in relation to,
Sorry, you can go, Bill.
Okay.
And I'll add where I can.
Please do, yes. So the requirements in relation to a worker is that they have completed the work health and safety training, the unit of competency, the specified VET course. But like any of the licenses, they are a threshold qualification. In terms of the work that they need to do, there needs to be adequate training and supervision provided at the workplace in addition to the specified VET course. So this is the same for any of the licenses that are issued by the department. The person employed needs to be trained and supervised, given adequate instructions so that they can undertake the work safely. Serena, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so the work needs to be done safely and competently, as you've pointed out. But in terms of obtaining the license as well, whether it's Class A or a Class B asbestos removal license, the relevant experience will need to be demonstrated at the application process. So if it's a Class A, that person whose competency is being tested will need to demonstrate that they have a minimum of 3 years removing friable asbestos, because that is relevant to the Class A license. And then with a Class B, it would be a minimum of 1 year removing non-friable asbestos, because that is relevant to a Class B license as well, of course, having provided copies or evidence of obtaining those specified VET courses.
Next question. Does the RTO have to be from WA for safe methods of demolition as is required now? So
you can go. No, so it just needs to be read by a registered training organisation that is offering the course for safe methods of demolition, sorry. So it doesn't need to be a Western Australian RTO.
Thanks, Serena. Is a visual inspection from an independent, competent person now required for all bonded removal work, bonded asbestos removal work? So the answer to that is yes, there is a requirement the person be independent, and it is required for bonded, but they don't need to be licensed. So I think we've just about come to the end of the questions that we've been asked. We've got no more. We've still got plenty of time. So if there's any questions you'd like to ask us while we were here, I will just perhaps recap on some of the other issues that I've talked about, and that is in relation to the work health and safety laws. We've done other webinars, and these will be available on the DEMERS website either hopefully today or next week. If you're a member of a professional association, you can make associations, if you require further information, the department, they are encouraged to view the department's website where, as I mentioned before, we are increasingly putting information up on the DEMERS website. A new element of the work health and safety laws is in relation to the prescribed VET courses. So this is going to be a significant change for Western Australia. There is a transition period for your asbestos licences, for your existing asbestos licences, and those are specified in the work health and safety regulations. So if you check in there, you'll be able to see that. It's a little bit different to the normal 12-month period, because you are required to complete the prescribed VET courses either after 12 months or within your normal expiry period as well. Let me see. Yes, we have another question. Will training course qualifications from courses such as IP402, IP403 and IP404 be accepted when applying for an asbestos assessor licence? So the specified VET courses are the ones you need to complete. I'm not sure what those various classifications are. If they are the specified VET courses, well, yes, they are. But if they're not, the specified VET courses must be completed, and the information about the specific courses, if they're not on the website, will be there very soon. Asbestos containing dust, when is it Class A or Class B work? So if it's, it depends upon the circumstances a little bit, but if it is bonded asbestos, it's Class A work. If there is asbestos dust, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be a friable asbestos removal work, and that will be the circumstance. So you've asked a very open question there. Perhaps if you can provide some more specific details, but generally if it's bonded asbestos removal work, it will be Class B, and if there is asbestos dust in the air, it's likely to be friable asbestos removal work. The next question is there any consideration in eliminating the unregulated 10 square metre rule in regards to the asbestos removal and disposal? So the 10 square metre threshold, there are no changes to that work. So if you are, if it's a workplace and it's more than 10 square metres, you will require a licensed asbestos removalist. When do you think the guidance material relating to what was discussed today will be available? I expect the slide presentation to be provided in the very near future. I would like to think within the next week or so. Some of the other guidance material will be available as quickly as we can get it done. But as I've mentioned, there's a great deal of work, and we've had to prioritise some of our work activities in terms of developing the guidance material. The next question, if the competent supervisor for either demolition or asbestos leaves the business, does an application need to go into DEMERS to update a licence with a new person? Zarina.
Yes, so for both demolition, well, for demolition and all of asbestos removal, there is a requirement that there is a nominated supervisor, and that nominated supervisor has to demonstrate the experience. If that person is to leave the company, an application needs to be submitted to the regulator to have the nominated supervisor approved, and the requirements around having those nominated supervisors approved will match pretty much the same requirements of a new application process. So their experience will need to be demonstrated, as well as their qualifications and some of the other requirements, depending on what license we're talking about.
I just want to confirm there, Zarina, but I think for demolition, it's the one supervisor, but for asbestos, there can be more than one supervisor.
Yes, that's right. So for demolition, you'll only have the one supervisor, which doesn't differ too greatly to the current set of legislation, and with asbestos, you may have at least one. So that means that even if you're applying for a new application for a Class A or a Class B, you can actually nominate 3 nominated supervisors, for example, but the experience and qualifications has to be demonstrated for all 3. If you have 3, for example, again, and one of those 3 leaves, you are just required to notify the regulator. You don't have to necessarily replace them with somebody else.
The next question. You stated that the length of a license is valid for how many years? What was it previously? So I think that's probably the license, the asbestos licensing.
So with demolition, currently its license is valid for 2 years. Under work health and safety, it will be valid for 3 years. With asbestos, both Class A and Class B, it is currently valid for 3 years. Under the new legislation, both will be valid for 5 years.
Next question. How do you determine if soil is contaminated with asbestos? So in terms of determining if soil is contaminated, there's a couple of approaches. First of all, if the regulations require that if it looks like there is asbestos or there may be asbestos at a particular workplace, it must be assumed that asbestos is present at a workplace. Alternatively, if you have any concerns, there is a duty to find out, and you can do that by obviously engaging one of the specialist companies who deal with asbestos. So duty is on the PCBU to make sure that asbestos, if there are concerns, that it is verified, and if you're unsure, it needs to be assumed that it is contaminated with asbestos. If asbestos removal is carried out as part of a demolition, is there a requirement to get an independent clearance prior to demolition?
So asbestos you'll need to determine if there is any asbestos on the property or whatever it is, the structure that you're about to demolish. And if there is, you will need to have that asbestos removed. So demolition cannot be carried out until the asbestos is appropriately removed. But of course, you'll need to determine what type of asbestos it is that needs to be removed as well. And then based on that determination, you will either employ a Class A or a Class B asbestos removalist.
The next question. Will there be any consideration to the licensing and regulating the single-storey house demolition sector, which currently operates unregulated? So in terms of the existing licensing arrangements, there is no suggestion at this time that there will be any changes to the single-storey demolition requirements. However, it's not appropriate, or it's not correct to make the suggestion that it is unregulated. Under the work health and safety laws, even though there's no prescribed requirement for licensing, the demolition must be still carried out in a safe manner, and it's up to the PCBU to determine who has the primary responsibility for ensuring the work is carried out in a safe manner, but it must also involve the workers and other people at the workplace. So the work health and safety laws apply to the single-storey demolition, but certainly the licensing requirements do not. So the next question, asbestos dust classification. A bonded asbestos roof removed by a Class B, there is dust on the rafters and beams. Can a Class B remove that dust? So small amounts of asbestos as part of the process in any removal, there's always going to be small amounts of dust. So there's some leeway there, but it depends upon the quantities. I have a concern or complaint regarding the quality of asbestos training courses. Comment, WorkSafe has no controller. Okay. I have a concern or complaint regarding the quality of asbestos training courses. If you have a complaint about asbestos training courses, the appropriate agency to go to is either the Australian Skills Quality Authority, ASCA, or the Training Accreditation Council. The courses are common throughout Australia, and they are required to be delivered by a registered training organisation. So if you have those concerns, please take those concerns to the appropriate regulator, and they will take the appropriate action. Is the asbestos assessor licence requirement new to WA? Serena.
Yes, with the enactment of the work health and safety legislation, the requirement to carry out clearance inspections, for example, under which would ordinarily be done by an asbestos assessor, will become a regulated type of work. But as previously mentioned, a license will not be required for this for the next 12 months to allow the industry to come up to speed with the requirements of obtaining that license.
So the requirement for an asbestos assessor is in the model work health and safety laws, which means that is also in the other jurisdictions around Australia. So the licensed asbestos assessors in WA will be able to operate in those other jurisdictions. Okay, so we now have run out of questions, so we will close the session. If you consider any, if you can think of any other issues you require clarification in relation to, please send those to the email addresses that we have provided, and you can see down the bottom there on that page, there is an email address for you as well. So thank you for your participation, and as I say, please consider subscribing to the WorkSafe newsletter if you want to be kept up to date in relation to the work health and safety laws.